You're listening to KYRS 88.1, 92.3 FM, Medical Lake and Spokane. Coming to you now, it's Gary Krug with this week's edition of Longwaves. Thank you for joining me today on Long Waves. Get everything adjusted here at the console. It's always a little bit tricky. And I'm going to tell you right at the beginning here that the opinions expressed on this show are solely my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of KYRS, its staff, management, or underwriters. Just me. Well, golly gosh, I was driving down here today, and I heard on NPR, good old NPR, which hasn't become one whit conservative, oh no, not in the last couple of years, breathlessly announcing the news that Mullah Omar is dead. Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, perhaps the son of bin Laden, certainly a guy who only had one eye. But he's dead. And they said there had been rumors of his death before. Well, that's kind of what the show is about today. We've got to talk about these rumors that take the place of truth here in week 5, the final week of propaganda month on Longwaves Radio. So regarding Mullah Omar, let us turn to the always interesting and well worth reading and listening to Robert Fisk on The Independent from the UK, who on Wednesday published the article, Mullah Omar, creator of the Taliban, is dead for the 4th time. Aha. So, Fisk writes, how many times do you have to kill a man before he dies? Not for the first time, Mullah Omar, Emir of the Faithful, friend and protector of Osama bin Laden, creator of the Taliban, destroyer of graven images, has died. In fact, he's died 3 times before, most spectacularly at the hands of Pakistan's notoriously vicious and notoriously slipshod Inter-Services Intelligence, ISI, in 2011. Untrue on that occasion, of course. Bin Laden himself died at least twice before the Americans assassinated him in 2011, they say. Even George W. wrote him off in 2002. Then he was dying of cancer. Then he was dying of kidney failure. The top people's paper even killed off Ayatollah Khomeini of cancer long before the old boy expired. If all these stories were true, these folk would have outdone the most important resurrection of all, several times over. It's an intelligence officer's dream and a journalist's nightmare. So he goes on to say that he knew a fellow in Afghanistan who said he understood why intelligence agents would announce that someone was dead, because then the person who was allegedly dead but not would pop their heads up and you could kill them, and then they could be really dead. But this is really hard to explain, to prove, to disprove. So the poor journalists, as Fisk notes, the poor journos searching around for sources have to write cruelly obfuscatory obituaries just in case the old panjandrum has actually kicked the bucket. So familiar and rather gruesome. So, in this familiar and rather gruesome tradition, here goes Mullah Omar, possibly the son of bin Laden, but very definitely one-eyed, declared himself the Emir of the Faithful in 1996, and on and on and on. So, here we have yet another death from the usual sources, and actually led Robert Fisk to say perhaps the Americans should amend their $10 million reward to the slightly more inspiring dead and alive. Maybe so. We have this background of mistruths. We have this background of lies and deceptions and obfuscations which serve only to justify all of these acts that otherwise would make no sense whatsoever to anyone at all. And I want to talk about some of these today. Let's take a simple one. Now, there is a widespread belief, especially among people on the right, that Margaret Sanger, one of the key founders of Planned Parenthood, was trying to kill black babies. Herman Cain made this statement back in 2011, and it still gets mileage because if you repeat things long enough, people take them as truth, and most people don't actually dig in. I don't even have time to dig in and find the facts on a lot of this. So sometimes I rely on people I find credible at checking facts, and one of these groups is PolitiFact, who usually do their work pretty well. So here we go. So Cain, among others, has gone on and said that Planned Parenthood is all about a genocide on black people, and that the Planned Parenthood started in primarily black communities so that they could help kill black babies before they came into the world. This is Cain I'm quoting here. It's planned genocide, Cain said. He wants the U.S. Congress to yank funding for Planned Parenthood, which gets about $75 million a year for non-abortion health services. So, PolitiFact goes on and says, well, Cain asked his audience to check his history, so we did. And Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood, is credited with making birth control legal and widely available. She was born in 1879, was white, blamed her mother's death on her frequent pregnancies. So you can see that she might have some significant motivation for wanting to help women with birth control, in addition to the very good reason that it gives women control over their bodies and doesn't make them constantly the slaves of pregnancy. So for PolitiFact's research, they consulted with scholarship, with Cain's camp, with anti-abortion groups, with Sanger's biographer, and with multiple experts on Cain's claim, they say. The supposed evidence that Sanger supported black genocide is a loose collection of her most objectionable statements, her ties to the disgraced eugenics movement, and her work on what was called the Negro Project, which started in 1939, and it brought birth control services but not abortion to black communities in the South. These facts don't come close to supporting Cain's claim. So they then give a little history of the eugenics movement in the U.S., and it was terribly popular back before World War II, especially in that period between the two wars. It was this theory that the human race could be improved through better breeding and genetics, and it was backed by people from such different political and social backgrounds as Theodore Roosevelt and the intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois. So, the U.S. movement, PolitiFact goes on, at its best, the movement pushed for better prenatal care. At its worst, it enabled forced sterilization laws and let claims that blacks and immigrants were inferior to masquerade as science. And this was really part of the worst bit of the eugenics movement in this country. Now, in other countries, it got even more sinister. I mean, the Nazis were all about eliminating everyone with defects from the country, in addition to Jews, in addition to homosexuals, in addition to communists, diabetics, Down syndrome, eliminate them from the bloodline. Okay, back to Sanger. So Sanger, quoting Politico, welcomes some of the movement's more notorious leaders onto the board of a predecessor to Planned Parenthood. She also endorsed paying pensions to women of low intelligence who agreed to be sterilized. And again, this is not good, and And in the historical context, it was not, in that perspective, evil. We can look at it now and say, yeah, okay, pay pensions to women not to have babies if they have low intelligence. I mean, there is a kind of argument to be made that's not easily glossed with facile statements. Back to Politico. But we found no evidence that Sanger advocated privately or publicly for anything even resembling the genocide of blacks, or that she thought blacks are genetically inferior. They say every academic PolitiFact consulted said that Kane's claim is wrong. University professor at the University of Indiana, Ruth Engs, a genetics movement expert, said, quote, "I have never run into any serious academic reference of Sanger or others wanting to kill black babies." Okay. And there's some other facts that Kane gets wrong, and a lot of people get wrong. She did open a Harlem clinic in the early 1930s, but her first birth control clinic was in 1916 in Brownsville. It's a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, which was mostly Irish and Jewish. So in 1930, this is 24 years later, she opened a Harlem clinic, and about half of its patients were white. Members of the black establishment, quoting Politico, including Dubois and the black newspaper, the Amsterdam News, supported it. This is hardly the pro-genocide camp. Now, this is an important bit. None of these centers performed abortions. Those who think, quoting Politico again, those who think Sanger wanted black genocide cite the Negro Project, but even their strongest evidence, a passage from a letter she wrote advocating that organizers recruit black ministers for the project, does not come close to providing a genocidal plot. Sanger wrote, "We don't want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs." That's a long way from advocating or conducting genocide against black people. Her correspondent shows, quoting Politico again, her correspondent shows this sentence advocates for black doctors and ministers to play leadership roles in the Negro Project to avoid misunderstandings. Continuing, the facts of the Negro Project suggest nothing more genocidal than a public health project. Black leaders Dubois and Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of the National Council of Negro Women and a pastor of the influential Black Abyssinian Baptist Church, were members of its advisory board. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was supportive. For Sanger to launch a genocidal plot behind their back and leave no true evidence in her numerous writings would require powers just shy of witchcraft. Really, calling the Negro Project a genocidal plot defies common sense. Why would Sanger try to destroy a race of people by giving them access to the very thing she thought could make life better? Planned Parenthood's early objective was not, quote, to help kill black babies before they came into the world. Sanger failed to rise above the ethnic and racial paternalism of her time, but that's a far cry from being genocidal. Kane's claim is a ridiculous, cynical play of the race card. We rate it pants on fire. Okay, so why does this story still have legs? I mean, this is an interesting idea. Why does this story still have legs? Why do people still go, oh, Margaret Sanger, rah, rah, rah? Because it keeps getting repeated over and over and over again. All you need are some hothead politicians pushing the statement, referring people to a few out-of-context lines, and there's your argument. And people hear it. They don't hear complicated refutations like the one that Politico made that I was reading from. They don't do their own research, and they're certainly not going to go read through the voluminous works of Margaret Sanger. But the constant drumbeat of the noise, creates the false impression that something is true. Because I keep hearing it. And after a while, hearing things said in a positive statement, enough, conditions the mind to just accept them as factoids without exploring or examining it. And this is really the same kind of ground around truthers, around the birth truther people, around the chemtrail people. They hear little fragments of things, usually from other people rather like them, and they hear it enough because they're living in an echo chamber that it takes on the force of truth for them. Like that poor deranged woman who was going on about how she could see rainbows in her garden sprinkler. And this didn't used to happen. What are they putting in our water? What are they putting in our air? Well, the water, mostly industrial waste and biopharmacals that are being excreted in urine, but in the air, mostly pollutants, but certainly not, strange little things to change the air and make us all infertile. There are a lot of good reasons that human beings are showing significant drops in fertility these days, especially in men. Sperm counts are way down, motility is way down, and we don't need to look to special chemicals being added to the air. We can look at less conspiratorial but no less frightening causes, like things such as esterdiols in the water. These are chemicals commonly used in the manufacture of plastic, especially the BHA stuff, and commonly leaching out of plastic, especially if it's heated, like if you microwave stuff in Tupperware, you leach a lot of chemicals into it. And these chemicals can mimic estrogen in the human body. And for men, especially boys, or for feti, these are not good things at all. And you get things like reduced sperm motility, collapses of birth rates, live births, and we see it in the most species. We've seen it for 40 years now in amphibians and reptiles who are extremely susceptible, that a lot of them are just dying off. Another one of the aspects of this great die-off. But just keep repeating that HAARP was a conspiracy to control the weather, because you understand nothing about physics or meteorology or atmospherics, but, HAARP was all about controlling the weather. And so they run off, and Margaret Sanger was proposed, destroying the black people, and Planned Parenthood has been diabolical from its beginning. Nonsense. Politico makes the point really well. But the story keeps circulating. And then we have these other sets of stories, the ones where another terrorist is killed, or so many ISIS members were killed in a bombing, and ISIS is an existential threat to the U.S. and worse than Al-Qaeda, and blah, 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 blah. And there are even journalists who are saying that openly that, in their opinion, this Baghdadi fellow who's supposedly in charge of ISIS is in fact manufactured and not even real, which is also plausible. So the question is, so deluged by lies and propaganda and commercials, and there's not a dime's difference between any of them, how then do we proceed to make sense out of the world? How do we sort out, in our own sensibility, in our own minds, in our own worlds, how do we sort out how we're being lied to, who's lying to us, and why are they doing it, and how are they doing it? And I want to walk through this a little bit today. And the case study I'd like to use, because I've been working on it lately, is the case study of Big Pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies. And there are a couple I'm going to focus on. One is the whole incidence of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs. And this is the over-the-counter stuff, the OTC. So we're talking about things like Motrin IB, Aleve, Celebrex, widely used. And if you've been following anything other than sports and comics or the clown show that's passing for the presidential preliminary campaigns, this has made some news of late, this issue about Big Pharma. In particular, just recently, the FDA issued a warning on various prescription medicines and non-prescription drugs that Americans consume stupid amounts of. And just to give you an idea, out of 5% of the world's population, that's about what we have, we consume about 50% of the global market of pharmaceutical drugs. About 50% of it. And we pay stupid amounts of money for it. For example, there's that hot new hepatitis C drug, Havarti, that comes from Gilead Pharmaceuticals. Havarti, a 12-week course of treatment, I'm informed, costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 up. But you can get it in India for $900. You can get it in China for $600, but not here. Not here. Because here, this lovely hodgepodge insurance industry, which is part and parcel of pharmacy and part and parcel of medicine, colludes with drug manufacturers and with Congress to keep prices artificially high. Average American over the age of 40, I read, is paying over $20,000 a year in medical costs. Whoa, it's just drugs, $20,000 a year just in drugs. And when our former illustrious President George W. Bush was hammering out the new Medicare provisions, one of the bits that he wrote into law and got written into law and passed was that the U.S. government, even on Medicare, cannot bargain with drug companies over the price of pharmaceutical drugs. That is insane. Basically, it says gouge us as much as you want and the people will pay. The government will pay. The largest single buyer of prescription medications is not allowed by law to negotiate lower prices. Hey, boys, line up. Come get your money. Here it is over here now. Yes, sir, I'm the decider, and I decided you're going to stay rich. So, back to NSAIDs. NSAIDs were approved by the FDA, and that should make them safe, right? The Federal Drug Administration goes in and looks at these drugs and tests these drugs. Oh, wait, they don't actually test these drugs. They don't actually generally do their own inside testing. They rely on research conducted by the drug companies. Research conducted by the drug companies. What could go wrong with that? And in the case with some drugs, members of the FDA Approval Council, doctors and scientists and what, are often on the payroll of big pharmaceutical companies as consultants. So, things get passed through. Pharmaceutical companies fudge their data. They have a whole set of cute little tricks they use to make sure their trials work the way they want them to. So, for instance, with some of the NSAIDs, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, with some of these, pharmaceutical companies worked out this really, really cool trick, which is when they found out they were causing strokes and death in people who had any kind of pre-existing heart condition at all, they just quit testing it on anybody who had any history of pre-existing heart conditions. Well, there you go. Problem solved. All kinds of little tricks you can do. If you end up with data that doesn't really support the marketing plan of the drug, and it is the marketing plan that drives a lot of the research and how the research is conducted. If you get data that doesn't support it, you simply don't publish it. Or if you do, you bury it in some obscure journal in another country, the Inner Mongolian School of Pharmacology annual report or some ridiculous thing, and nobody ever sees it. They also have members of their staff commonly ghostwriting reports on the studies and then going to their paid consultants and giving them money to basically add their names, to review and change the results that are in front of them. But according to reports I've read, it often happens that they just put their name on it, or they make some minor change, or they just hand it back and go, yep, sounds good to me. Y'all run it because you're going to pay me either way. So these are some of the problems that are blocking serious review of drugs. And this has enormous problems for you and me because they spend billions of dollars selling drugs knowing they're lethal, knowing they have severe side effects such as death or permanent neurological damage in the case of one drug I was looking at, not an NSAID. But yet, these drugs sell, and they have these, since, when was it, the 80s, we have this direct-to-consumer marketing in the U.S. where they can actually target you and me, and they do it with precisely the same techniques we've been talking about this entire month. They introduce fear. They give you a solution to make your fear go away. They use celebrities. They use doctors. They use actors dressed as doctors to read the marketing material. It's not like the doctors are coming in with their own opinions. They're just reading the marketing stuff from the pharmaceutical companies. And this becomes the reality of these drugs. Quote, "Today, we know that the risk of heart attack and stroke may occur early in treatment, even in the first weeks. There is no period of use shown to be without risk." This is what Judy Racusin, MD, MPH, Deputy Director of FDA, said about NSAIDs. Facts indicate, quoting from the FDA blurb on their website, facts indicate that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs can increase the chance of heart attack or stroke, either of which can lead to death. These serious side effects occur as early as the first few weeks, and the risk might rise the longer people take NSAIDs. Death is a serious side effect. Yeah, I guess it is. These are over-the-counter drugs. Most people use them for temporary relief of pain and fever. And we act like they're harmless, like they're in the same condition as aspirin, in the same position. And sometimes people, not knowing they're the same drug, will double down and use multiple brand names that contain the same chemicals. And they just call it headlines, and we all act like it's perfectly safe. So this does suggest that the FDA has been remiss in its duties, but that's nothing new. That is nothing new at all. I'm going to talk about another drug problem in a little bit, and that's the problem of OxyContin. So anyway, Mike Whitney ran around, and he looked up some articles on Google, just for the headlines. Doctors issue ibuprofen toxicity warning. Warning, runners may be at risk from ibuprofen use. Ibuprofen trebles the risk of stroke, doctors warn. Ibuprofen side effects land thousands in the hospital. The FDA's dilemma about ibuprofen and cardiovascular risk, that from Forbes. Ibuprofen blunts aspirin's cardioprotection. And these drugs were supposed to be safe, and yet they knew they weren't. One of the former FDA drug reviewer, a guy named Roland Kavanaugh, is cited by Whitney as saying, quote, "While I was at FDA, drug reviewers were clearly told not to question drug companies and that our job was to approve drugs. We were prevented, except in rare instances, from presenting findings at advisory committees. The 2007 formal policies were instituted so that speaking in any way that could reflect poorly on the agency could result in termination. If we asked questions that could delay or prevent a drug's approval, which was, of course, our job, management would reprimand us, reassign us, hold secret meetings about us, or worse. Obviously, people will self-censor." And this is your FDA, right? So all these little innocuous drugs we think we've been taking safely actually have the possibility of severe and fatal side effects. This is nothing new. Right? A few years ago, we had Vioxx. Vioxx was being issued for joint pain and for osteoarthritis. There's a lovely commercial of gosh, her name's flown right out of my head. The skating champion who won all the gold medals, Hamill. And she's skating around saying, "Oh, now I'm not governed by my pain. I'm governed by what I want to do." Yet Vioxx was killing people left, right, and center. And Merck, the company that manufactured it, was actually fined $950 million for doing this. $950 million. You know what that is, $950 million? That's their advertising budget for that drug for 9 months. That's just the cost of doing business, isn't it? $950 million. Right? Hasty review by the FDA. And in 2004, Merck announced its voluntary recall after some 25 million Americans had been prescribed the drug. Vioxx apparently doubled a patient's risk of heart attack or stroke based on about 1.5 million patients' records. And this was about to be published in The Lancet by a fellow named David Graham, an MD and an FDA investigator. So what does the FDA do? They call The Lancet and tell them not to publish. Your government at work, folks. Here's what Graham's data indicated, that 140,000 Americans out of that 25 million, 140,000 had suffered Vioxx-related heart attacks and strokes, that 55,000 had died, and many more were permanently disabled. Even though this had shown up in an early clinical trial, this is the case where they just excluded anyone with a history of heart problems from any further trials. Boom. Then, once Vioxx was approved, right, Merck's spending this $100 million or so a year, they're getting sales of $2.5 billion in 2003. $2.5 billion a year. Right? And even after the bad news comes out, Merck and Pfizer and Novartis, right, are fighting. Merck in particular is fighting to not have the drug banned. Now, this is an interesting bit here. Whitney notes 10 of the 32 members of the FDA committee, which voted 17-15 to keep the drug available, had taken money from Merck, Pfizer, and Novartis, all of which were running Vioxx-like drugs, COX-2 inhibitors, COX-2 drugs. So 10 of the 32-member committee. The drug would have been banned if the paid whores had recused themselves or had been not allowed to vote on it. And maybe they didn't disclose these conflicts of interest. But worldwide, Kaiser Permanente, who have lots of big records, figure with Dr. Graham's work, figure that the global death toll was around 165,000 people from this drug. 165,000 people. So, and who went to jail? Absolutely nobody. Absolutely nobody. So here we are. Now we've got this whole new set of drugs. Right? We've got this whole new set of drugs that we now find out kill people and significantly increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. And so what's the FDA going to do? They're going to ask drug manufacturers to change their labels. They're going to ask them to change their labels. So, how does all this work? Well, you've got to look at the pieces. So here we have to identify who the propagandists are. And in this case, the propagandists are the big drug companies, big pharma, right? Okay. They have a specific purpose, which is selling a drug. And they have two odd ideologies that they use to drive this. The first ideology is of improving the health of people, which is not what they're about at all. Their real ideology, their real purpose, of course, is about making money. And all of this takes place in the context of free markets. We're selling products that people want and need. And there are some of those. I won't quibble with that. There are some products that people want and need. But there are also drugs that no one should take, and especially when the companies know they are lethal. Now, the next point we need to consider is the context and the context in which the drug is being marketed and sold, and the context of society, where the drug companies and to some extent insurance companies keep selling this idea that every medical problem, every problem people have in their lives has a medical solution. Your kid's too nervous, they got ADHD, right? If you have some aches and pains, you take an NSAID, right? An NSAID. And if you don't have a disease, they'll invent one, low T. Ask your doctor if you have low T. Well, what's low T? That's a man getting older. When the testosterone levels come down. And of course, the solution of the pharmaceutical companies follows the rule of the hammer, that if you give someone a hammer, everything needs pounding. So you give someone a pharmaceutical company and everything has a pharmaceutical solution, which is nonsense. It is absolute nonsense. So invent a condition and then you have a drug for it, right? You've got a drug lying around, you're not sure what to do with it, or you just have a drug which is going out of use under one label. It's going to become generic under one label. You can repurpose it for this new made-up condition and get a new patent on it. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? Prilosec did that, right? Prilosec, the antacid, from gastric reflux, the original purple pill, it went out of patent. And Prilosec then, as a generic, you could buy for about $20 a month, taking it as a normal use. So what do? They reissue it under a new name. Nexium. What do you pay for Nexium? $125 a month. $20? $125 a month. That's 6 times the price. And it's the same damn drug. But back to some of the made-up stuff. If you're shy, or maybe you're just going through a shy period, maybe you have a condition, maybe you have social anxiety disorder, or if a woman has premenstrual tension. Well, first of all, we had PMS, premenstrual syndrome. Now, syndrome sounds bad, but they've even topped that. Premenstrual dysphoric disorders. Well, beyond a syndrome, you got something wrong. You've got a disorder. Take this. Or in pretending that they can have things like pre-diabetes. Maybe you have pre-diabetes. So we've got this idea that everything can be treated medically. And they're, golly gosh, all the stuff they're telling us they can treat, they have drugs for, because they wouldn't tell us if they didn't. So we know what they're doing. Now, we know who they are. So who's their target audience? Well, of course, there's you and me, the direct to consumer kind of marketing. We see it on TV, we see it in magazines, with these 4-page ads. There's the big one that's all pretty in the pictures, and then there's 3 pages of disclaimers and contraindications and side effects and all of this. But we're part of it, sure, because they want us to go in asking for drugs, because in America's overburdened and grotesquely inefficient medical system, doctors will just give you the damn drug to get you out of the room a lot of times. You know it's true. I know it's true. It's a rare doctor who'll even say, well, I understand what you're asking for, but I don't think that's what you need to do. Most of them will just write you the damn script. And indeed, physicians are one of the target audiences of the propaganda. Doctors. So how do they target doctors? Well, they'll come in, spend a couple of minutes with them. They give the doctor a payment for his or her time, and they'll give the doctor $5 toward his or her favorite charity, all just to tell them about a new drug. But they'll do other things too. They'll sponsor symposia, they'll sponsor conferences, and they'll put on lavish dinners for the doctors and make them watch a little slideshow about the new drug, and the pharmacy reps will be falling over themselves going around to talk to the doctors. So this is extremely common. They also target medical students. From the time they're in school, they'll target medical students with all kinds of free swag, coffee cups, stethoscopes. They can't give them money. They can't make it look like it's a bribe. But they're actually just medical students. They're not yet doctors. They'll often contribute to their conference travel and their conference stay. Invite them out to dinners. And push the drugs. Also in the target audience, we have members of Congress. There are something like 2.5 pharmaceutical lobbyists for every member of Congress, and they're in there selling their stuff. No, this is a good drug, really. It's a good drug. People are going to like this. They need it. And we'll donate generously. They lobby the news media, get their people on TV shows, get the talking heads out there, doing the bit. And, oh, yes, there's a new drug. And you can do this with video news releases, VNRs, which are corporate manufactured products that in the end look like a news program from somewhere. And it's not. It's from somebody's PR department. But especially small local stations will often run these because it looks like news and it didn't cost them a penny to make. And so they just run the article. So we know who the target audience is, right? We know what the organization and the structure of the propagandists are, right? They're big corporate, multinational corporations. They have CFOs and CEOs and boards of directors and marketing divisions and advertisers and all of this. We know all that. Okay. But this is also revealing of the kind of propaganda they produce. So they have to direct the propaganda to all of the areas that might be, all of the aspects of their corporation that might be affected. So the people who are going to write the prescriptions, the people who are going to write the prescriptions in the future, members of Congress, news media, government agencies like the FDA. Got to go in and lobby them about your drugs. Do you know we spend more on drugs, on pharmaceutical drugs in this country than on cars or higher education? Is that not insane? Is that not insane? And, you know, they use a variety of media to spread this propaganda. They use television, of course. You can't turn on a TV without damn pharmaceutical ads. Newspapers, internet, specialty magazines, pop magazines, you know, special magazines for targeted audiences. Pop mags for women, for men, for kids. And they also use the other familiar methods of the propagandists. AstroTurf, you know, fake community organizations, direct-to-consumer, DTC techniques. I've mentioned actors reciting claims, condition branding I was talking about a moment ago, and of course those wonderful invented diseases. So, where do we go from here? Well, let's look at another case. Let's look at a really, really good case. A recent publication by The Week. Mike Mariani has a title that says it all. How the American Opiate Epidemic Was Started by One Pharmaceutical Company. And ostensibly, the article is about the state of Kentucky, which is suing Purdue Pharma, rather large suit, for damages, saying that they lied, saying that they knew the drug was being abusively prescribed, they had evidence of this, they took no steps, and that from the very beginning, their claims that the drug was less addictive were nonsense. Quoting from Mariani's article, a pernicious distinction of the first decade of the 21st century was the rise in painkiller abuse, which ultimately led to catastrophic increase in addicts, fatal overdoses, and blighted communities. But the story of the painkiller epidemic can really be reduced to the story of one powerful, highly addictive drug and its small, but ruthlessly enterprising manufacturer. And they are small, but they are ruthlessly enterprising. In fact, they've just entered into the Forbes top 20 richest people, the couple who own the drug. So, you know, back in '95, FDA approved OxyContin. Hits the market in '96. All right, so '96, first year, they got $45 million in sales, which is not much money, right? By 2000, they're averaging $1 billion a year in sales. In 4 years, they've had a 2,000% increase in their income, right? By 2010, they're making $3.1 billion a year on OxyContin, right? And the reason the drug caught on, I mean, there are all kinds of drugs out there for painkiller. There was Vicodin, there was Percocet, there's fentanyl, you know, all kinds of synthetic opiates out there. Why did Vicodin catch on? Well, because they marketed it furiously. Turns out one of the eldest brother of the family, a guy named Arthur Sackler, who was one of the original owners, was really, really good at advertising, right? He worked with William Douglas McAdams, a New York-based advertising firm, and he expanded ways of increasing medical advertising in medical journals, TV, radio marketing. And he was also one of the people who pushed Valium to be the first drug to hit $100 million in revenue in a year. Anyway, so in 96, as they started to release the drug, they also expanded their sales department and increased the number of sales reps so that by 2000, they had 671 sales representatives just selling this one drug, mind you. OxyContin, a drug that basically sells itself. So, I mean, they were clever. They set up profiles of doctors and prescribing habits. But it wasn't to determine if people were getting addicted or if doctors were prescribing it illegally. Quoting the article, the idea was to pinpoint the doctors prescribing the most pain medicine and target them for the company's marketing assault. Wow. They weren't even looking to determine if the people who were selling the most drugs were in fact just issuing a lot of drugs or whether they were seeing people with a lot of pain. And it never occurred to them that this wonder drug of theirs could possibly ever just be ground up and injected. All those little time-release bits of opioid in there couldn't just be ground up, smoked, injected, whatever you're going to do. So here's the bit we need to think about now. Look at the complete organization of the system that allowed Viax, that allowed Prozac, which was causing people to commit suicide in their trials, and they knew it, and they buried the evidence. OxyContin, which is an absolute plague, especially in poor states like Kentucky. That hillbilly heroin's real popular with them. Look at the absolute synchronicity, the synchronizing of government, of pharmaceutical companies, of advertising, television, all presenting the seamless image which targets us to purchase products, the danger of which we do not know. There's some great drugs out there, no question. But the idea that, A, we need a drug for everything needs to be medicalized. Smallest headache, take something. No. Write it out. Severe pain's a different matter. I've experienced severe pain. Yeah, it's nice to have something to take the edge off. But we don't need a drug for every little thing. And we certainly don't need drugs for made-up conditions. Sure, there are people out there who are depressed, but we shouldn't diagnose shy people as depressed or as having social dysphoria. Right? There are women in the world who have hideous menstrual cycles, but heaven knows we're not going to call, there's no need to label them premenstrual dysphoric disorder, especially not when smoking a little weed may be the best product for them. Queen Victoria used it and seemed quite happy with it, as do a number of women I know. But no. So we have this enormous machine that everything fits together. And what fits it together is money and power. Money and power. It cuts right across government. It cuts right across the media. It cuts, it turns the pharmaceutical corporations, the government, the media, the whole medical enterprise into one big whorehouse with the best advertising you've ever seen. One big whorehouse with the best advertising. Pulling people off the streets. Oh, you don't have to take it if you don't want. That's such a despicable statement. When you're inundated, when people are inundated, encouraged, lied to, manipulated psychologically to think they need things, why then? Why do we think they can stand up to this onslaught of encouragement and then have doctors only too happy to respond positively? You want that drug? Not a problem. How many do you want? You can't go to a hospital anymore and come out without a stupid, go in with something like a broken arm, and you will come out with a stupid pile of Oxycontins and Vicodin. I mean, a stupid pile. More than any reasonable person is likely to need. So the whole system encourages it. Meanwhile, the manufacturers get rich, TV gets rich, the doctors keep getting their money, the FDA still exists, and they can do their revolving door of people from pharmaceutical companies going to the FDA, going back to the pharmaceutical companies, and going round and round and round. And we can see this happening all the darn time. So we really need to broaden our understanding of propaganda and look at it. Look at the structure of it, look at the techniques it uses, and then it's pretty easy to see it for what it is. This coordination of power and money and a desire to control, or just to steal the money out of your pocket, all coordinated and aimed at you and me. And that takes me to the end of today's show. And it is the end of July, so this marks the final show in Propaganda July. You've been listening to Long Waves Radio with Gary Krug. You can email me, longwaves@kyrs.org. Love hearing from you. You can find podcasts of the show on YouTube, Long Waves Radio, 3 words, put it in quotes, easy to find. Also, I'm on Facebook, Long Waves Radio. You can get links to the podcast there, and when I have the Nous, I actually publish some of the articles and some other interesting stuff. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with a new show on a new topic, and I'll remind you all again that you're listening to KYRS, Medical Lake, Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. Until next week, have a good one. I'm out of here.